everyone. Welcome to the Internet of Senses Hearing podcast. My name is Tyler Heaton. I am a sound designer and researcher in the Spatial Technologies Applied Research and Training Center at Lethbridge Polytechnic, where I specialize in the implementation of spatial media and technology in immersive experience design. The Internet of Senses podcast is a series of podcasts with experts in various fields that focus on our five senses and the connections in between. The Hearing series is an opportunity to explore how we perceive and process auditory signals and the amazing research and technology being developed in the world of sound and hearing. Today, we are joined by Dr. Thomas Fritz, professor and group leader in the Music Evoked Brain Plasticity Research Group at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig. Tom is the founder of JYMM, a new technology and a new training concept that merges musically expressive performance with physical exercise. He is passionate about advancing music-related rehabilitation technology, music and exercise and sports performance, and exploring these areas in an evidence-based manner. Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Tyler.
Music, hearing, sound, all of these things with that combination with exercise. What I'd like to start is, where has your interest in music started? Has music always been something that you have had an interest in?
Yeah, I mean, music, of course, I mean, really my interest for music started in puberty, I guess. Yeah. And I found it to be an amazing valve, where you could put these emotions into and transform even, sadness into something beautiful. And actually, in a way, that's a lot of this is what we still do today, is that we transform sentiments, impatience, for example, huge frustration or anger, into something that they can find beautiful. And, I mean, this is maybe for later on in the conversation, but, you take anyone, even someone after a stroke and with minimal consciousness, and they're trapped in this state, and they're still social animals, and they still have this, need to express themselves. And if you, on days when they perform well and you give them something to do, they should put something from the side of the table onto the middle of the table. They take it, and then they bring it to the side of the table, and then they let it drop very dramatically, because that's their only way of still expressing themselves, saying, it's no use even dealing with me, it's all over. But if you give them something else with which they can express themselves, like what they think is beautiful music, and have them control music, it really, really hits deep. And I think it's a way how, people can find a way back to wanting to be alive. And that can be something that also is the difference between life and death in many patients.
Brilliant. That's a beautiful way to look at it. The performance of music as compared to the listening of music, there's always this, when you watch somebody at a very high level perform, whether it's a violinist, whether it's a DJ, somebody who is very connected to the music that they're performing, there's a lot of physicality involved. There's a lot of, strange expressions or body movement. What is that connection there? How do you see that connection? And has that been a part of your research?
Oh, yes, this has become so important. When I started out as a music researcher, I never imagined that they would invite me as a keynote speaker as the, neuroscience of sports society. But, I found that there's this very, very profound connection of your physical experiences and experiencing music. And I think this really touches upon how music was created by our ancestors in the first place. But yes, so the physical experience of making music, let me describe it in other terms, So one big word that people like to use, which describes the quality of the musical experience, is often immersion. And what I think, it's maybe also a little bit of a personal stance there, but what's much more immersive than being even at a concert and listening to it is being on stage and playing the concert yourself. And that's what we, for example, try to provide for our patients, is that they are actually creating something. Maybe the range is very constrained and very defined, but still, if you're in charge of the dynamics of what's going on, some very, very interesting processes happen in your neurology. And this is something that we're super interested in. And I think we are onto something really, really important that could also dramatically increase the efficiency of rehabilitation and prevention.
Absolutely. It's certainly been popular in the entertainment world with things like Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and more recently immersive virtual reality applications like Beat Saber, or things where you're boxing or you're moving and there's music involved, but there's also that interaction that drives the music. And so your comment about what's more immersive than being on stage and playing, and that immediately made me think of things like Guitar Hero, where at one level it's a rhythm game. There's a challenge to the rhythm, but on another level, it's a fantasy of being on stage and of playing the music. And so there's that connection there.
And a very, very interesting aspect that feeds into this, really amplifies the effect of you're in charge of the music, is the aspect of exertion. So I'm actually inspired to this technology that we're nowadays using so much, and it has been shown, proven to be quite efficient in this whole neuroscience of music domain, and in therapy and prevention, etc. But I was inspired by this, by some music ethnological field experience that I had. So I was doing some, ethnological experiments with music. I was interested in commonalities and cultural differences. And it's a really interesting and super manifold story. But in the first few weeks when I arrived there, nobody wanted to participate in my experiments because they thought, oh, what kind of potentially dangerous guy is that? Is this some dark magic? Because I was doing some reaction time tests. I had this solar mobile facility I was putting on the roof every day. So, I was having headphones and all that stuff. So people were like, whoa. But in this time, I participated in their musical rituals, which I was super interested in anyways. And I learned so much. I was looking for the common denominator of what they think is music and what I think is music. And then at the beginning, you realize, oh, they don't actually have a word for music. Weird. But then they do a transfer of these musical sounds to, musical rituals that they perform, although it sounds totally different, the music that they use. And when I participated in their rituals, it was fascinating, because for them, this, like musical euphoria through a combination of physical exertion and minimal musical expression, that's like the thing to do. It's better than getting drunk, because getting drunk on millet beer, which is also not so nice for the naive. It's an acquired taste, and also your body has to acquire to all these potential transmissions of illness. So I was very sick the most of the time. But for them, playing, for example, this exertion music on flutes, where they would then also run around in circles, it's the way how to achieve this musical euphoria, or what we here would identify like musical trance, or very systematically and very fast. And I was extremely impressed by that. And when I came back from these experiences to my lab, I wanted to understand this much better. So I tried to investigate this in a lab setting and optimizing the use of music then in our rehabilitation settings. And also I nowadays do it often in a sports settings. And it's exactly this recipe that I learned from the MAFA that led me to this quite interesting field in neuroscience, really, where we now use these methods to have people experience relatively strong emotions in a very controlled setup.
I'd like to take a moment to kind of introduce what you were just referring to, because I'm familiar with your study in 2005 in Cameroon, but can we just sort of introduce that experience, that study? I'm curious what led you to this ethnographic research. How were you aware of this group? Was it through colleagues? What was that experience that led you to go and visit Cameroon on the border there?
So in my career, I started off with doing these experiments with music to better understand how the auditory pathway it processes music that you like or that you dislike. What are actually the actual anatomic mechanisms that amplify or filter out this musical information? And that was super interesting. But at the same time, when I was using these, machines that cost millions of euros, I was thinking, okay, but how does actually these cultural differences or even musical subcultures play into this? Because I might like something that, my neighbor might hate, although, we've been growing up in the same village. And so I got really interested in that topic. And that's why I wanted to do this cross-cultural experiment. And I had the opportunity. So I was scouting different places in the world where I could do these battery of experiments to understand more about universalities and cultural differences in, the psychology of music perception. And a friend and a colleague of mine, she had been working as an ethnologist in this region, and she offered to introduce me to people in a very remote area in a border region to Nigeria and the Chad. So sub-Sahel region where you're guaranteed to get ill. And I supposedly had a number of illnesses at the same time. So, it's tough, but it was very, very inspiring. And I learned a lot from these people who have preserved very traditional ways of living, but also of making music.
It's very interesting, the connection between tribal music, traditional music. I think what a lot of people would maybe refer to as atonal, or not having the same sort of foundation that Western sort of post-Christian music has, and yet it's universal, as you say. There's this connection, all over the world. How, in your study, I mean, I'm interested in two different things, sort of how we reconcile that difference but similarity between music of different cultures, and then also how that tribal rhythmic exertion based musicality, how that was interesting to you in your study.
It's interesting. You are at this very, very different music culture, but as many of these also archaic music cultures, they use a pentatonic scale. Like they have these flutes, and then I was doing multi-track recordings of their 5 different musical phrases that they would use. And then I was analyzing this. But, funny enough, although it's pentatonic, when you listen to it, you think, that's so strange. That's so strange. And one of the reasons is that in their music, they don't know the concept that something is happy or something is
Mhm.
sad or something is angry. These emotional expressions through music. In their music, that's not required. But still, if they listen to the music or make the music themselves, they get very emotional. So I had many people, who listened to recordings of this music and then also manipulated versions of the music that I used to find out which acoustic parameters maybe play into this universally. But, listening to recordings of the music, many people would actually start to cry because they thought this was so beautiful. And I mean, usually, if you're a naive listener, like a Western listener, it sounds like, wow, what's that? It's like some people think maybe it's a car horn concert or something. So something very strange and not very appealing. But for them, it seems to be that among others, this also, for them, it's really important the amount of energy that people who produce this actually put into this to create this, because playing these flutes is really, really exhausting. It's exhausting to play this, and it's strenuous. And then they also run around in circles. And alone, if a certain musical piece has a certain duration, they already recognize these people were serious about it, and if you present it with short stimuli, for example, short pieces of the recording, they'd say, yeah, children shouldn't play this, yeah. Or if you, if you manipulate it, they'd sometimes say, oh, that's how the people from this and that village play it. I really hate it.
Very
That's
interesting.
human, I guess,
Mm-hmm. That exertion and that embodiment of the musical expression, what role did that play in your study? Was that something that you expected to find, something that you were hoping to find? Was that link between the exertion and the musical expression, and then the emotive power of the music, or the I guess, for lack of a better term, the meaning of the music that they were using?
Yeah, actually, the energy seems to be part of the meaning that they encode in the music, and part of this positivity and life force that's encoded in the music, yeah. And actually, I did some battery of study also into decoding meaning in the music, but that's a bit of a longer story. But what
Mhm.
is quite essential is that there is a positive interaction effect in the experiments that I did here back in Europe. There's a positive interaction effect of playing the music expressively and having this physically exerting challenge. And this is something that I was very interested in. And, either I was with these flutes, either I would go for this hyperventilation aspect of it, because it's a type of hyperventilation that they do. Like, for example, I somewhere have a bunch of flutes I can show you later, but there you have these small flutes and you do, flat breathing, but fast, or you have these big flutes, yeah, and you have, it's really physically very challenging. And then I also run around in circles. So I thought, wow, is it this physical exertion or is it this hyperventilation aspect of it? And I decided to first go for this physical exertion aspect, also because, I wanted to create an intervention where you don't have to put a medical doctor next to it all the time if someone has hyperventilated. And that worked out really well. So, we find all these extremely efficient effects that usually you'd have to train for months as a patient to achieve, already after one-time intervention. And we're very, very interested in what's happening in the neurology that this is even possible.
I think that's a great place to talk about the euphoria. You talk a lot about the euphoria of music. What's the connection between that euphoria and the physical experience of music? Transitioning also from, what you experienced in Cameroon to what we now experience in things like, say, rave culture or other types of festival culture, where
Yeah.
there is more of a connection, I think, than other sorts of music.
So there are several parameters that are interesting to know there. One, it's called the super expressive voice quality of music. So it's like, when you listen to music, it's like you listen to voices, but instead of prosody, like speech melody, that can do, you have a much higher range of expression, and you can very, very efficiently and to a large degree stimulate this speech system for prosody. But at the same time, also what we have is it's so-called arousal. Yeah. So everyone knows arousal. So from being quite sleepy to being very, anxious or, very awake. And this combines in a very interesting way. So especially if you are in control of a certain situation, and that's what we observe, is that people, if they actually control the music, and it's a self-efficacy experience, they can control all these sounds. But at the same time, while they have an ownership with this music, this experience, they pump up their physical arousal. It creates in you, in an experimental setup, this experience that this is a really big and important emotion, and you have this emotional expressiveness and you combine it with this arousal, and that really does something very, very interesting. So if you want, at this point, I can already go into it a little bit, because the first time when I learned this in my neurology studies, I thought, why doesn't everyone know about this? Because, so I have to simplify things just a little bit, but in a broader sense, we have two systems how we control our muscles. Yeah, these two major systems. Of course, we all know, that there are muscles in our belly, and when we eat something, they're active, and we are not necessarily actively controlling them. Yeah, that's a little bit also part of the story. Yeah, but these two major systems, one of them is so-called voluntary motor control or volitional motor control. So if we take a glass of water and, we can do with it exactly what we want at any time point, yeah? And it's very practical, yeah? And there's another system that we call emotional motor control. For example, you know this from the fact that you cannot fake a smile. Like you can, you can pull and it doesn't really look right, except if you really have to smile. Yeah, because the volitional motor control system cannot activate this outer lower eye ring muscle. And this is not only true for this one muscle. That's just showcase type of scenario. No. For example, if we talk with each other, Tyler, we're using our voices and we're creating all these speech melodies, and then we're talking for quite a while, and now there will be a full stop, and there it is, and it's all just happening. And the reason for it is we are actually delegating this to our emotional motor system. And because we're in this authentic social interaction, we can use it this way. But try it if you're in a speaker studio and you're pretending to be talking with Tom, all of a sudden, what you try to do is you're trying to use your volitional motor control to do what usually the emotional motor control does, because it's not, the authentic situation. And then you try to simulate this, emulate this, imitate this, and it's not working, it's not working. You have to be like an actor that it even sounds a little bit authentic, yeah? Why is that? Because it's an additional resource of motor control that we only have access to in an authentic situation. And what we think that we are doing with combining this exertion and musical expression is that we are stimulating this emotional motor control very, very systematically. And after an intervention like that, people still have a number of physiological effects that are longer lasting, like 1 hour, 1.5 hours, but also cognitive effects. And the reason for this is that when we, for example, use prosody to talk with each other, we do this speech melody. So we have a super high performance control over our larynx. We have a high resolution, high performance control over how we change these muscles just a tiny bit to, and then we also have this procedure where it's, there's been this sequence of words and whatnot, and there will be a full stop, and there it is, and this is an amazing a performance that everyone can do, but not all the time, only in the right type of scenario. And we think we're stimulating this. This is very, very helpful for rehabilitation, because everyone knows it, that, you know, sometimes you can achieve so much if you're in the right mood and for it, you know, then all of a sudden you get all this stuff done, you know, that wanted to be done for weeks and you couldn't do it. Yeah. And this is the type of situation we would like to create for the patients in a more systematic fashion, but really for everyone who would like to stimulate their emotional motor control system, because that has a whole range of benefits. Of course, I'm not saying that, you know, you only need the emotional motor control system. I mean, in some illnesses like trauma, it's overstimulated and it's in your way. But to have your both motor systems, volitional motor control and emotional motor control, work together as a team, that's key. That's key for health, and that's key for improving during illness. And we think that actually many illnesses, they develop because these two motor systems, they take away resources from each other and are not supporting each other.
I think this is a great segue into talking about JYMM and the technology that you're developing with JYMM. You've alluded to rehabilitation and working with different types of patients. Can you describe a little bit about what JYMM is, how it works, how the technology, I mean, not in great detail, of course, but sort of an overview of what the technology is, and then we can talk a bit about some instances where you've done experiments or you've used JYMM for different types of rehabilitation.
So basically, when I came back from Africa, I arrived at making as exhausting as possible. So I thought, okay, how can I do that in a way that's also still healthy? So I did it on physical exercise machines where you have, you know, very clearly defined movements. And then I had people do, for example, play a bass line with that. You know, and someone else maybe playing the drums. So I had people in groups making music together in a very exhausting fashion. And so it was amazing to see how this would be engaging for people who would want to do this for hours. I mean, some people get immediately hooked to this and never want to stop, especially children, you know. So as soon as children come into play, you know, no adult can usually come back to playing one of the workout machines, although they are not originally designed for children, you know. It's just something happens, I think, with our endorphin system. We've been doing experiments also in this respect, even with people, you know, in drug rehabilitation clinics. And we see that, you know, they find this as very, very rewarding and something that they hope, you know, in interviews, that this could help them to get down from their craving for hard drugs, that they do JYMM instead. It was also the only time that I saw anyone smile there and make jokes with each other. You know, so yeah, something spectacular is happening at this physiological level that we're trying to use, you know, as good as we can for patients and, you know, anyone who's interested in doing it. I'm not sure that really explained your question, but
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of the research and I've seen a lot of the presentations, so I think I'm a little bit more familiar with it than some of our audience might be. You referenced the experiments and the experiences that you had with the drug rehabilitation and that positive impact that it had on people who were both emotionally and physiologically challenged by their addiction. With other types of rehabilitation, I was watching one of your videos. You had a really interesting one where somebody who was, for lack of a better term, almost like in a coma or in a subconscious state, but was still able to respond to that movement with music. Can you go into that one a little bit more? That was really interesting.
Also, Alzheimer's patients, people who
Alzheimer's,
don't
yeah.
even know anymore who they are, but you give them a medium for emotionally expressing themselves, and they will be so happy to take it, you know. And also, it's a bit of a misconception that only music will work with Alzheimer's patients that they are familiar with, If you expose Alzheimer's patients to certain music, next time they may recognize the music, but think that they already know this since childhood. Yeah.
Mm,
So it's true that music that they know has a lot of impact. Yeah. But being involved in the creation process, that's what really where music still has such an important influence on them. And even in people who have minimal consciousness, for example, and on days where, they can do something to give them a channel where they can experience something where they, it's something profound if you can express, this is how I like the music to be. This is how I find the music beautiful. For everyone, it's a beautiful thing. And especially, if those people, if you can do it only with a finger and you can determine the music, for them it's very exhausting, But yeah, that's the way how you grab, how you work yourself out of this hole.
mhm,
And we started off with using these fitness machines, but nowadays, yeah, everything that's exhausting in rehabilitation or in sports, we try to gyminize. And it's wonderful. Yeah, you can also be the conductor of the whole orchestra all alone. You can also be a member of a band, of a heavy metal band, playing the guitars. And so usually, if you give people like music to play around with, it's fun for a while. But if it for them in a situation like that, it's really very meaningful. And this, it can be like a string that they can pull themselves out of their misery and back into life.
mhm.
Uh,
That's very powerful. I want to touch on the difference in the exercise sciences and in sport performance between passively listening to music in an environment versus performance or that feedback training that you talk about. Why is that so different? What is the I think we've touched upon the mechanisms there, but maybe in a more succinct way, why is that so powerful, the feedback side when you're actually performing the music versus listening to it?
I think the key is self-efficacy. So that's also the reason why people would synchronize to music they listen to when they're running. But they pursue an illusion of self-efficacy. Yeah, when you close your ears like that, and you walk around, you hear the bass of bone conduction, and you hear it, it's like a bass drum. But when you're synchronizing during running to the beat of the music, you're doing boom, chaka, dang, dang, like you got this instant musical superpower by this illusion of the superpower, at least, that you have an influence on this, on the world. You step down with your foot and it does boom, chaka, chaka, bam, bam, yeah, instead of just bok, bok. And what we try to do is we really try to give people the agency into their hands of controlling the music with their exertion. Yeah.
It's interesting reading about the effects that that's had
Mhm.
because of that agency, because of that ability to perform. Um, I want to go back a little bit to the group that you work with, the Music Evoked Brain Plasticity. Can you give sort of a brief explanation of what brain plasticity is and how music and brain plasticity are connected?
So brain plasticity is the capability of the brain to change itself, to develop. And most of the times it's a great thing. Yeah. So for example, you're learning something new, you're building all these new synapses, and there's all kinds of interesting processes, short and long term, going on. But there's also actually really dangerous negative brain plasticity. So if you develop chronic pain or a tinnitus or something, you know, like there's dangerous types of brain plasticity. Yeah. So what we have with sports, it's quite interesting. So usually these sports intervention in any type of rehabilitation therapy, it's always regarded among the top efficient interventions to do. So usually in all kinds of rehabilitations, people are, you know, advised to, you know, to do some kind of sports interventions. And the reason for this is because this metabolism, this increased metabolism, it also leads to the release of certain metabolites that increase brain plasticity. And usually that's a great thing. Yeah. If you, for example, want to relearn how to use your hands, and then this can be a great thing. But also it could be quite, you know, relevant to make this not such a general procedure, like everything's increased, but to make it more specific. And that's where also the music comes in. So you, as you know, music defines the atmosphere. It defines maybe even, you know, the sentiment that people would have during that time, so it could create an emotional release, or it could lead to happiness, or it, you know, it could create, you know, in people who are angry, could create this valve for them experiencing anger in a very accepted and controlled environment. And we know that both this physical exertion, sports, it leads to brain plasticity, and also that music and musical interventions lead to this brain plasticity. Even listening passively to music, for example, after you've had a stroke, has been shown to have enormous effects. And it seems that music is very good at triggering all kinds of different associations. So of course, you know, if we hear a certain song and we think, oh yeah, that's when I listened to it in that time and this time and here. But also a range of totally other associations, like, oh yeah, heartbeat, or, you know, like, oh, this sounds like the wind. You know, it's like a whole range of associations. And it seems that what we are doing is we are just very, very strongly combining the effects of physical exertion and of music therapy. And of course, there's a million other ways how you can do music therapy. But in this very specific scenario, we give people a lot of freedom, although in a very constrained fashion, where they feel that, you know, they can really freely, expressively enjoy themselves or even identify with the music. And we also see that, you know, when you give people the opportunity to do music in such a way, they much more strongly identify emotionally with the music than if you have them do, you know, a workout and they listen to the music passively in the background. It also dramatically increases how you like other musical styles. So, you know, my first thought was, oh my God, you know, if we're in the clinic and we have 3 people making music together, will that not be an organizational issue? You know, you have someone who likes this music and someone else who hates this music and another third person who likes something completely different, until we found out, oh, that's actually totally secondary. As long as everyone can control the signal that they're onto, they will, you know, we've described this also in publications, and we call it the band effect. It's a positivity bias towards the aesthetic quality of the music that I think everyone is experiencing who's playing in a band or has been playing in a band. So I know about it. So that on the evening, when you're making this musical session, at the end of the evening, you might be tending to think, wow, you know, that was quite cool, ingenious music. So, I'm so curious to listen to the recording of it. And then the next day you listen to the recording and you think, man, I don't know. There's such a discrepancy of, you know, of what I perceived yesterday, and where is now all the magic of the moment gone? Yeah, I can't hear it in the recording. And in Germany, we usually tend to say, we have to get this Neumann microphones. They might be better at capturing this magic of the moment. But, there may well be that this positivity bias plays an enormous role. And that's also what I think I have learned, from these music cultural experiments, is that I think, yes, there are a bunch of things that are actually quite universal, that are really perceived. And there's other aspects that are not universal, and it's really cultural specific. But what I think is really universal is that people feel that they can communicate at an abstract level from different cultures if they just sit together and everyone plays music somehow. Everyone has the feeling, oh, we can do this together. We respond together, even if they're from totally different traditions. This impression, we're communicating in a mysterious way together. I think this is very universal, this aspect of making music together. And I think that's also what has been quite an integrating role probably in the evolution of mankind, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
To make
Absolutely.
music
That
together.
I think that's a really important part of this conversation is understanding that connection between what music is, what music can be, and how we experience music in these different ways. As you've been describing the performative side, as you've been describing the physical side of it, the social connections, the emotional connection, I think there's such a greater depth of understanding about what music is, what it has meant for us culturally, what it has meant for us, what it meant for our ancestors, what it means for us now, and what does it mean moving into the future. And I think that's what's so exciting for me about reading your research is, where does music and sound take us now into the future? With your studies, with your understanding of this connection, where do we go from here? I mean, I study spatial. I'm really interested in spatial music and the spatial experience of sound and audio. And so there's a lot going in that direction. But where do we go with this? Where is your study taking you next?
Yeah, this connection about what's actually happening in the brain, how all these regions they correspond to each other. I think this has something anatomically musical. And that's also the reason why we respond so strongly to music, because it parallels to some degree what's actually going on in our brains. And that's also why when you listen to music compared to when you listen to certain sounds, you usually find that, listening to music, it engages the brain to a ridiculous level. Like everything's firing up, and you ask yourself, what the hell? And for example, until 20 years ago, if you had shown someone, how the brain responds to listening to music, everyone would have said, yeah, that's the language network when someone's involved in a conversation, maybe. And we see it when someone's just listening to music. Yeah. So it's very, very powerful working on us. And there's a whole range of different mechanisms that music is pressing buttons at the same time, how music has these effects on us. And accordingly, I think that, music will play a very important role in in, let's say, the culture of mankind. And I think it will dramatically also shape how we perceive reality. Of course, it's happening all the time that, everything's coupled to music, and, we have these messages and products and whatnot. Yeah.
Mhm.
But in the end, I think what started out as, people getting together, making music, I think that will still be happening at the end of times. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that people still get together and make music. And, I think that's also what's going to be consistent. I mean, yeah, maybe you're going to have this AI co-musicians, but in the end, people are fascinated by others doing amazing stuff. where they can identify with, and they can see how hard this is, yeah, or they can see how sensitive this is. And so I think the act of making music together will be forever. And maybe, of course, already a lot has been changing since we've been, drumming on wood. But I do think that a lot of other very, very important, I mean, either very great or very scary developments will be associated with music. And about that, because our neurology is wired for music.
Very much so. With your studies with JYMM, and you've been working primarily in exercise equipment, do you see this same approach being applied to other kinds of tasks, other kinds of even machinery and things that we interact with for these same positive benefits?
Actually, it's been quite interesting. So since we've had, actually we started to create a company together with Max Planck Society, also because there was such a overwhelming resonance on our research. Yeah, so like the first publication I did in 2013 about it, we were immediately on the front page of the New York Times and Le Figaro, and the whole sports scene was coming to us and was saying, hey, we want to do this. And we were saying, oh, wait a second, the moment it's only available in the lab. But since we've had more people in the media watching this, thinking about it, there's actually been quite many people approaching us saying, hey, we have a product that we would like to Geminize with you. And, that's how I dream it to be. For me, that's beautiful. Like, for example, there's this company here somewhere in Saxony, and they're, what they do is that after people have a stroke, they try to, as soon as possible, we call it mobilize patients. They do it all over the world. Yeah. So they try to have them stand up, and they're in this like robotic chair, and it's, and they try to bring people upright. So, but that's quite, for them, quite a dramatic procedure if you have been laying all the time after you've had your stroke. And now we're making a big concert out of this, it's beautiful to finally stand there and have the power of being upright. Yeah. And we try to condition that positively. Or, we had some other guy, and they're producing office chairs. And they say, oh, we have this new chair with a sports function where you can do this, seat cycling. And we want to Geminize that. We want people to have, an amazing experience doing this. And so I've been Geminizing this experience. And of course, there's a whole range of different products that where people approach us, and where I think, yes, some of them, they may, last, and some of them, they might not. Yeah. But in a way, it's like, sowing these seeds, and some of them, they may grow into big trees. Let's see.
Absolutely. Do you envision a future where you go to the gym and one of the options on every machine is to have it in Gemini's mode?
Hey, we are already working on that.
Oh, good.
We're already working on that. So,
Yeah.
absolutely. Not too far a future. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, also with the Olympics, it seems ridiculous, but imagine in a future where athletes are not just performing physically, but there's a musical element to their activity would be quite the interesting experience.
Hey, actually, I've piloted stuff like that. For example, with people doing like trick ski, etc., that they're, the movements would correspond. They would be able to, play music with it, etc. But talking about Olympics, there's actually one line of research that I'm doing. I'm also doing with athletes, and we've had this amazing experience at a Olympic training center in Thailand, where many of the Olympic teams, especially the swimming teams, they go in winter and they have their, training, 10 days of training or 2 weeks of training with the teams to prepare them for the Olympics. And we had been doing this with swimmers who were training for the Asian Championships. And, we did it because before we were doing this experiment where we were doing spirometry with participants. So let me just tell you, like, in a nutshell, the history of the scientific findings of JYMM. So it started off with, we found a euphoria after 10 minutes of training that would last for quite a while, like 1.5 hours. So a systematic increase in mood that would last for quite a while. And then we thought, oh, wow, what's actually going on? And we then had a look at what's happening in terms of perceived exertion. And we found, so people, when they do JYMM, after only 6 minutes, they perceive it as approximately half as exhausting. Half as exhausting. What? And then we thought, okay, maybe this is also related to the endorphin system and whatnot. So we did pain tests with them, and we found, it reduces pain perception. So, compared to a situation where people are listening to exactly the same music, they do exactly the same movement, but they are not controlling the music. So it's only this aspect of agency and self-efficacy that's different. And what we also saw is during the spirometry is that we saw, it seems that when you are actually controlling the music with it, the muscles that are involved are more efficient. So, they need to use less oxygen for the same amount of work. In other words, it seems the muscles are more relaxed and more efficient. So we thought, okay, how can we actually test if that's only happening in this one muscle that's used during the exercise, or if it's in the whole body? And our hypothesis was it should be in the whole body if there's this switch between this volitional motor control to emotional motor control. It should be, it should be stimulating emotional motor control in the whole body and making it more efficient. And that's why we decided, hey, let's do an experiment with really good swimmers where we know exactly their usual baseline. And then we have them do JYMM, and then we just measure how fast do they swim. And we saw that 4 of the 5 swimmers, it was just a small pilot study, I have to admit. Yeah. So usually we try to do studies with many, many, many people, but, try to find these super top athletes to do these experiments with you 4 days in a row. Yeah. So there was only this small pilot study, I have to admit. But 4 of these 5, they swam faster around times, and we're saying, I want to do this before my contest. And they actually invited us there at this training center to do this with Olympic teams before the last Olympic, though, that was in Tokyo. And then, just 1 year later, and I thought, oh, you know what, I have to do that some other time in life, maybe later stage. It's on the bucket list, though, But there is actually very, very interesting physiological effects and also these cognitive effects, they're super important also in team sports, etc. So we're actually in the process of working on this stuff and investigating with different labs in the world.
Yeah, that synchrony aspect that, when you were talking about, for example, in the drug rehabilitation where you would get 3 people on machines and they'd start to sort of communicate and laugh and joke with one another to play together. That I imagine that synchrony is very vital to team sports, especially that connecting with one another. I can imagine there's a lot there to research.
I think it should be a huge benefit, for teams. The functional groups in the teams of those who go later on the field, to have them condition themselves positively on really paying attention to what the other is doing and being positively conditioned to it, and then going onto the field, you know, having had a musical session and really positively conditioned on really doing something together. And so
Very
if
interesting.
there's anyone out there who would like to test this out with their professional teams, or, you know, even any type of team, I'm super happy to do this type of research.
Definitely. I'd had some questions just sort of more around the technical side of JYMM and just my interest there. Do you look at it as more of an instrument or more of a music player that is controlled by the participant?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I usually, you know, if I'm not paying attention, I'm usually talking about instruments. So
Mhm.
I have this like fitness machine, and I'm saying, yeah, you're on this instrument, because for me, it's like this is the tool to play music. But of course, it doesn't require a machine at all. You can do push-ups and play beautiful JYMM with it, etc. So this is something that of all kinds of gymnastics, or, in these people after stroke or with minimal consciousness, just like moving their finger, anything that requires their something where they give it all, exertion, where they really try to go over their previous thought boundary. Yeah. And that's, I think, where the JYMM is happening.
Does the style or type of music that is being played, is there an importance to that style? Because I've noticed it's very much lends itself to like electronic music that is rhythmic, sounds that can be manipulated by frequency or LFO or something like that with
We have
the
all
machine.
kinds of
All
stuff,
kinds.
Tyler. So, for example, what's really great is to play like, Latin music is great, like, because people like really get into the groove. Yeah, but it really works with all kinds of musical styles. I have to admit, I started out with electronic music because, I got into neuroscience because as a job, I was mixing electronic music in down-tempo lounges with all these crazed out people, on all kinds of horror trips. And I was like on the knobs and manipulating, doing these musical improvisations with frequencies. And that's where I first found a calling to go into, music research and also music therapy. It was, I think my first therapist type of experience. Yeah.
Interesting.